All right. Welcome, everyone. Okay. I hope everyone can hear me. Welcome to Econ 4011. And it's a pleasure to see at least the 20 of you who are right now on my screen. So let's see. So obviously we had options this year of how to run this class. I found that last year, last year, having this large lecture remote actually had a number of advantages. So one of them was that in a large lecture, people don't like to ask a lot of questions on Zoom. They can private message me, and lots of people did. And so I was actually getting more live feedback than I usually do. It also just makes it easier to run live polls, to play games, to do things like that. So I found that pretty much, from my point of view, it appeared that all the benefit that we usually get from the lecture, we could get at least as much benefit on Zoom. And obviously, there are still some concerns with having large groups of people in the same room, even vaccinated. So I'm fairly happy running at least the lecture component of this class remotely. I will be having office hours in person, and there will be recitations in person. Yes, so welcome to everyone. So let's see, I'm now going to do my screen share. Okay. And I've got the background there. So you're seeing me in front of the same background I would have been using last year when I was actually at home. This year I actually am in my office in Siegel Hall, and you can come see me here during office hours. Okay, so I'm doing share screen, and here it is. Okay, so this is first lecture. You'll see the way that I labeled these on Canvas. This is labeled Notes 0. That's not just like in an inside computer science joke or something. I labeled it Note 0 partly because it's an introduction and review mostly, should be mostly things that you already know, not so much things that will be directly tested in homeworks and problem sets. So sort of a one lecture, easing back in before we get underway. I think it will, though, have a few things which you haven't seen so much, which will be a preview of things to come later in the course. Okay. And okay, I also have tried to label my lectures with corresponding textbook chapters. This lecture is loosely similar to Varian Chapter 1, a lot of things that I've added myself. So you'll see that in most of the lectures we'll have substantial overlap with a particular chapter of the textbook. And I encourage you to read the textbook to solidify those concepts, but it's not strictly necessary, okay? Everything that I expect you to know, I am covering in lecture. But given that it can be useful to see the same things as phrased by a different author in a different format, you may find it helpful to read the textbook also as we go. Okay, so why not spend one slide reminding us of definition of economics? So if you just look it up in the dictionary, it says that it's a social science concerned chiefly with description and analysis of the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. Okay, if I was going to sum that up into something a little snappier, I would say it's the study of how we live together, or of how human society works to try to fulfill the needs and wants of as many people as possible. That is economics. So economics is all about the interconnectedness of people. Okay, so for you could say that Robinson Crusoe, the famous man by himself on a deserted island, had a form of economics as well, and that he had to decide how to best allocate his scarce resources of labor and goods to keep himself alive. But most of economics is about the interconnectedness between people. So the earliest economic activity, so there's always been economic activity, even before people became Homo sapiens, you'd have to say. So that would have involved barter of goods and services, also called favors. So there have always been all kinds of exchanges. Okay, a chicken for a hammer, or an exchange of labor for labor. I help plow your field and you help with mine, or of labor for goods. Okay, now as the social network expands, the network of people who are exchanging such goods and services, not all such deals are going to be bilateral. Okay, bilateral meaning between two parties. Okay, let's see. Okay, so maybe Alice did Bob a favor, and instead of repaying that favor directly, Bob might say, "Hey, Charlie, could you do something for me? I owe Alice a favor. Could you do something for her? Okay, help her harvest her crops, whatever it is." Okay, that could be when Bob asks Charlie that maybe he's already done something for Charlie, or maybe he now owes Charlie a favor. Okay, and everyone is sort of keeping track mentally of who owes who a favor, or right, and they probably try to repay those favors as soon as possible, or else they become socially ostracized. Okay, and this kind of informal favor exchange still happens all the time, and some kind of informal mental account is kept. Okay, even within families. Right, there's a sort of economics where the labor is divided. Some families even find it useful to write down lists of chores and to try to make sure that they're divided evenly. But as society becomes larger, this kind of accounting, where you're exchanging a favor for a favor, trying to loosely make sure that it's kind of fair, it becomes hopelessly difficult and inefficient. Okay, and if you start to interact with people outside your own social circle, you may need something from them and have no way of repaying them. You may not have a mutual acquaintance who can repay the favor. It may just become impossible. So considerable amount of time ago, money was introduced as a unit of account. Okay, at first, only a small number of exchanges were mediated by money. And then as society grew larger, the exchange of money came to govern more and more activities until today. It's in some ways it dominates society, but it still exists alongside informal favor exchange, which still governs a lot of activity in important ways. Okay, when you consider that a lot of the labor you do takes place inside your own household and is not governed by the exchange of money. Okay, so money doesn't mediate all interconnectedness, but it's come to mediate more and more. Okay, so economics is a study of how we exchange goods and services, which governs a huge spectrum of human activity. Okay, now you might think from that last point that economics is only the study of the parts of human activity that are mediated by money, and that is not true. Okay, economists, for instance, have been instrumental in designing organ donor markets, which are not mediated by money. Okay, legally they're not allowed to be. So anyway, economists are really interested in any sort of exchanges of goods and services. It just so happens that many of those exchanges happen through money, and that is parts that happen through money are most commonly associated with economics, but economics is definitely not limited to that. Okay. All right. Okay. So money as a unit of account. If money is functioning well as a unit of account, it tells people that you've done something for the world. Okay, you're doing your bit, and now it's the world's turn to do something for you. Okay, and if this is functioning properly, then it could be you have this money that says that you've done something, you provided some good or service, and you're entitled to some good or service in return. And you can take that anywhere and give it to anyone, and they can, whoever the best person is to provide your needs, you can take it to that store. Okay, so I provide what's hopefully a good of giving lectures like this one, and eventually that leads to money in my bank account, and I can go to the grocery store, and I don't have to go into a conversation at the checkout for the grocery store that, oh, yes, I think I am entitled to take home enough groceries to eat today, or maybe I took home groceries that are slightly more expensive than what I could subsist on. Is that really, am I really entitled to that? Were my lectures good enough, right? I could show them a recording of my lecture and say, look, I gave some pretty good lectures this year, and that's a contribution to society. And yes, it is important for the students to learn economics. I really am contributing to society. Can I please take my groceries home? That wouldn't work, okay? So the fact that the money in the account serves as sort of a validation of the fact that it's your turn to consume some goods and services, that's really indispensable in the modern economy. It's a much more precise and flexible form of favor exchange. Okay, I can't just go to the grocery store and say, I provided a service, I gave 100 plus students a lecture, provide me some goods in return. Instead, it's all mediated through money. Does the system always, or at least usually, work well? That's a major question throughout all of economics, okay? And it's very easy to come up with ways that it works far from perfectly. However, something like this system works far better in terms of concrete measures of prosperity, health, lifespan, nutrition. Works. Some version of this system works far better than anything else that's been tried. That doesn't mean that there aren't endless ways to tweak it, try to make it better, more fair, etc. Okay. Next section. Okay. Economics deals in models. And when I was thinking about models, I was reminded of this song excerpt, which I will play. All right. Yeah, so that was a #1 hit in 1976. In principle, I could have heard it in utero at that time. So why am I? Why did thinking about models remind me of this song? Well, the idea of models, okay, is that the world is too complicated to understand all at once. Okay, so it's really these first two lines that most make me think of models. So I says that I rose above the noise and confusion just to get a glimpse beyond this illusion. So you have to sort of take a bird's eye view, not be sort of confounded by all the uh, details that surround you, that too many to understand all at once. If you just sort of get bogged in the details, it could even become an illusion. So the world can, in a sense, become more clear and true by stripping away some of the details. And that's what models do, what economic models do. And then in the very next line, you have the caveat, okay, I was soaring ever higher, but I flew too high. Of course, in the process of stripping away details to make your model, there will always be the danger of stripping away some crucial details and getting things wrong. So in discussions of economics, go to any sort of neighborhood economics seminar where people are presenting and contesting their latest work. And much of the discussion will be about what was put into the model, what was left out. Was it okay to leave that out, or did it cause sort of a fatal distortion that's giving you all the wrong results? Okay, so there's always this tension between you can't analyze everything at once. No one can. Have you analyzed enough? Have you put in enough detail to get reasonably accurate answers without so much detail that you go crazy? So I like the next two lines too. Though my eyes could see, I still was a blind man. Though my mind could think, I still was a madman. Yeah, I mean, so it's possible to see what's around you and yet not understand it. And it's also possible to be able to think, okay, in fact, to be able to think quite rationally, but if you're missing some key facts, you can get things drastically wrong, okay? So, yeah, I mean, that last line, it actually reminds me of friends of mine who suffered from mental illness, who were very smart and sort of hyper rational in a lot of ways. And a lot of the ways they would talk were extremely logical. But of course, you can get almost anywhere, while still being extremely logical if you start with some wrong premises, or if you selectively ignore some key evidence. I mean, some people I'm not even talking about just popular conspiracy theories that lots of people believe in, but things that are really, even people who are really around the bend into thinking that they're being stalked by the government, like I think of John Nash in A Beautiful Mind, are extremely rational and making logical deductions within their sort of very distorted worldview. Anyway, so I think these song lyrics bring up a lot of interesting points. I have a direct message, which I may get to at some point. Okay. Okay. And the other thing this reminds me of, some of you have heard the story of Plato's cave. So Plato told a story of people who were in a cave, and all that they could see of the universe was shadows that were cast on the cave walls by reality. Okay, and they thought that those shadows were reality. Okay, and then it's very hard for them to even conceive that there's a world sort of outside the world of the cave, and when they first, if they first come out of the cave, at first they'll be blind and unable to understand it. We all see certain parts of the world and don't have access to others. And of course, Plato was claiming that reading his books and taking a broader view of things would lead people to a better understanding of the world. Okay. Okay. So yes, so a short way of saying all this about models is that sometimes we have to ignore some trees to see the forest. Which ones to ignore is a delicate problem. Okay. Okay. Models. Okay, so already said most of this. So any analysis, whether verbal or mathematical, focuses on some factors and ignores others. Now, an excellent computer for predicting everything is the universe. Okay, if you run the universe for a year, it'll tell you what's going to happen a year from now. Okay, I sort of borrowed that joke from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I think. But it runs too slowly, so we simplify. Okay, if we want to get any understanding of what's going on, you can't look at the whole universe all at once. One very simple example is that when we're looking at supply and demand, we often look at one good at a time and the supply and demand for that good, and don't think directly about other goods, even though the supply of other goods certainly affects the demand of this good and so on. Okay, so we might later look at more detailed models that look at more than one good at once. And we will, in a few weeks, do that even in this course. Okay, so I'm going to next talk about a simple model to remind you about supply and demand. But first, before I go into the next little section here, I'm going to take a break and talk a little about the syllabus and logistics. And if everything's going right, then you're now seeing the syllabus on screen with me. And you'll also find this on the Canvas website. Okay, so here I am. There's my name. You've all found the Zoom link. Recitation will be in person. Okay. Now, recitation is to go over additional problems. Some weeks, recitation will be time going over old homework for people who had trouble with it. Some weeks, part of the time, maybe also going over problems on the new material from that week to sort of help you along with the current homework. Okay, so that's what recitation is for. It's optional. Okay, and usually only a fraction of the class attends. Okay, that fraction, depending on how close we are to the next exam, but usually something less than half the class. Okay, if you all decide to show up for recitation, we'll have to look for a bigger room. So class, okay, you know where the links are. You've found me. Textbook, as I said, it's a variant textbook. Okay, it doesn't much matter whether you have the edition with or without calculus. I will be using calculus, but the book with calculus just has a few extra equations, and I'll be going over those anyway. Okay, so either one of those editions are fine. Everything that you're responsible for will be covered in lecture. There is maybe a 75% overlap with the textbook. Okay, so you may very well be aided by reading the textbook as well. Supplemental reading, there's this very nice book by Tim Harford, The Undercover Economist, which covers things in completely non-mathematical language. Okay, so it's intended for beach reading rather than being a textbook. But although he doesn't use math, he covers the topics in a very logically rigorous and careful way, even though he uses a very sort of conversational style where the book is meant to be able to be sold at airports and not just for students who are majoring in economics. But he manages to combine that with being very, very precise, I think, about the economic concepts. So occasionally I'll discuss excerpts from that book. Okay. Assuming no major changes to the health and safety situation, we will have exams in person. Exam 1, a short checkup, only 40 minutes long, half a period. I used to call this the quarter term. It comes about a quarter of the way into the class. Exam 2 is a full period. It will be cumulative on everything up to that point. Okay, and then the second half of the class will be separate. Okay, so yes, so I have two sort of half classes here, which I conceive of as almost entirely separate. The first half, in brief, is consumer theory, and the second half is game theory. Okay, and you'll see what those things mean as we go. Okay. All right, and there are the dates for the exams. Okay. Exam 3, you'll see, is TBA. This is because I am fairly indifferent to having the exam during the last class period or having it during finals period. So I'm going to put a poll on Canvas for you to vote. So yeah, we do have an assigned slot in finals period, and I'm happy to use that. It has an advantage that it gives us a longer time period for the exam. Okay, and I like that. Okay, it allows you more of a chance to show what you know. If we have let me tell you, if we have the longer time period, I will not lengthen the exam very much. I will mostly just take advantage of that longer time period by saying, here's some problems you should have plenty of time for. Let me see what you can do without a lot of time pressure. Okay, so that's the advantage of having the longer exam. Okay, I'll take advantage of it, not by giving a longer exam, but by letting people have time to show what they can do. On the other hand, lots of people like to not wait till the end of exam period. If you prefer the exam during the last class, obviously we can do it in that format as well. And there will shortly be a poll that I'll announce on Canvas. Okay, so do feel free to message me at any time. I usually, when I see that messages are arriving, I normally sort of finish my thought and then click on them. So I'm now clicking on the 9 messages that I have. Okay. So someone asks where the exam is. It's a good question, and I don't know that. I'll have to figure it out. Okay. Okay, there's a campaign in the chat for last class period. Good. So yes, feel free to lobby. I don't know if we could make it like real politics and have a public debate. No, we won't do that. There will be a private vote. Okay, so if you disagree with this vocal contingent that's in favor of last class, you will get a chance to vote anonymously. Do we have to have a hard copy of the textbook? Shouldn't matter. Okay, so if there are good electronic copies available, that sounds good. Okay. Yes, and someone else asked a good question back when I was talking about money. Is it significant that modern money is not backed by anything of value? Yes. So yeah, that's a question I won't be getting into in full depth. So obviously, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that certainly has some consequences. No, in the sense that it fulfills pretty much all the functions that we wanted to fill, despite that. And mode therapy, that would be, I will discuss that a little bit later in the course. That is more of a macro topic. Okay, so expect to see more of that in macroeconomics courses. Okay, office hours are there, Tuesday 1 to 3. I tried to make that overlap more than one class period, so that as many people as possible can come to at least part of it. Okay, and by the way, 1 to 3 doesn't mean that you have to be there at 1. Okay, that means drop in anytime during that window. Okay, and yeah, obviously some people are going to have conflicts for that entire window. And if you, if you need to meet, let me know. Okay, grading. The exams count the most. You can see the 3 exams will add to 70%. Homework 28%. Participation 2%. I'll get to that. In terms of the curve, I'm fairly generous. The people taking this class tend to be good students. I tend to give about half of the class, sometimes even a little more, somewhere in the A range. And most of the rest, B grades. And, you know, the whatever percentage it is that gets less, and sometimes it's less than 10%, okay, but something like 5 to 10%. Usually, how am I going to say this? It doesn't come as a surprise at the end of the term. Okay, so when I give lower than a B, it's always something that I put some judgment into when I look at the scores at the end of the term as to actually where that cutoff will actually be. And it tends to be people who have a disappointing performance in just about every aspect of the course. Okay, so not people who had just one bad test. So yeah, so with some small minority of the course that of the people in the class that tends to happen. Not a huge deal, but it's not something where you just usually not, pretty much not, that you're just slightly below an 80 average and you're going to get a C. It's considerably well below that. Okay, and the way the curve winds up working, okay, the window for a B is usually pretty big. Okay, so the window for an A may be only about 10 points wide, so something like a 90 to 100 average, or sometimes a little less, depending on how hard the tests turned out to be. The window for a B, I'm usually more generous. Okay, I'll sort of look at the scores, get a sense of things, and usually go a fair ways below 80 for my B window. Okay, so what does participation mean? So that 2% that's participation, we have a program that's called MobLab, which is designed for playing economic games in class. It's a very nice program that the department has been nice enough to pay for, so you don't have to pay for a license. So I encourage you whenever possible to join the lectures live so that you can participate in these economic games and polls and experiments. I'm going to be fairly generous with participation credit because I know sometimes people have technological problems or other problems. I don't want people to panic every time that they missed out and didn't quite participate in something. So if you manage to participate in at least half of these activities, then you'll get the full 2 points. Okay. And it's not going to matter, by the way, whether sometimes we'll be playing games where you're, doing whatever, trying to choose prices to make a profit or whatever the economic game is. It's not going to depend what your answer is for grades. Okay, of course, I want you to be engaged in trying to make good answers, but it's not going to, in fact, affect your grade. Exactly what your answers are. Okay. The lectures will all be recorded. Okay. Right. As I say that, I remember now that in my very first lecture for last year, I didn't have the default set to record, so it didn't record. Yes, my record logo is now on. So yes, that happened once, and then I set the default, and now it records. Okay, so all the lectures are being recorded, will be recorded. There were maybe a couple of people due to travel issues or otherwise who are watching from 12 time zones away. And then I don't expect you to get up in the middle of the night to join us. You can watch the recorded lectures, and I'll just give you the participation points and it won't be an issue. Okay, so I'm going to now catch up on the chat. I have 4 things here. Yes, so someone asks, third exam, is it the final exam? Yes. Someone asks where to join the mob lab. I'll be providing that link soon. We will not be doing it today. Okay. Okay, so what actually are we going to be studying? The first couple of weeks will be partly a review of standard supply and demand diagrams and how we use them to analyze taxes and externalities. Reposition the pointer. As well as studying the contrast between monopolies and competitive markets. This is out of order from how the textbook does it. Okay, so to me, it's a natural order to do things because it corresponds most closely to what you would have already studied last year in a standard Principles of Economics course. In the textbook, though, it's chapters 1, 16, 25, and 35. Okay. Then in the next phase, it'll be closer to the sequence in the textbook. I'll be covering something called choice theory. And this is more novel. This is more something that appears in intermediate, that is not in, not in first economics course. I mean, even the first topics, I said it would be a review, but not totally a review, okay? Because I'll be adding more mathematical detail to topics that you cover in Principles of Economics in that first couple week section, okay? The next 5 to 6 weeks, more of a novel topic. So, the cornerstone of all economic theory and economic activity is individual choice. So people see a market before them, and they make choices of what to consume. And we're going to study the mathematical modeling of individual choice, and that will lead us to the mathematical modeling of markets, where many individuals are making choices, and that is called exchange. And again, that's in a different sequence in the textbook, but I believe in the textbook he put it in chapter 32 because it's more advanced than what many courses cover at all. Okay, so it's something that many courses would skip. But in terms of the logical sequence, it really goes where I put it. Okay, after chapter 9. So I'm putting things in a logical sequence, whereas when he wrote the textbook, he sort of is hoping to sell this textbook to many different universities, teaching things at different levels. And he put the things that he thought might be too hard for some people at the back of the book, but it's not too hard for us. Okay, so I'm putting it in the sequence where it belongs logically. So that will take us up to exam 2. And there's the date. That date, there's a correct date for exam 2 earlier in the syllabus. I believe that date there I didn't update from last year. Sorry about that. Okay. So I'm going to catch up with the chat. Okay. Someone asks a question about taking this class after Mech 290. So Mech 290, I think, is the business school version of the class. I think there's a lot we cover here that's not in the business school edition of Intermediate Micro. Okay, in answer to that question. Okay, in answer to how the classes compare, and generally where they overlap, we do things in a more mathematically sophisticated way here. Okay, that's probably why I've enjoyed teaching at WashU. Okay, is teaching in the economics department at WashU is that people have a choice between taking this course and going on the business school track, which has its own set of economics courses, which are taught in kind of a different way. And I actually taught at the business school at Northwestern before I came here, and for a number of reasons, I much prefer teaching in a traditional economics department. Okay, I think so. It's sort of more emphasis on a thorough understanding of the models. Okay, along with and I kind of see it as a both and instead of an either or. Okay, so business school classes tend to be very focused on fun examples. Here, I hope to have fun examples and understand the underlying theory in more depth. Okay. So that's why this class is better. What can I say? So and it has nothing to do with who the instructors are. This is better than an analogous class that I would be teaching if I were at a business school. Okay. So the other main segment of the course after exam 2 will be almost completely separate from the previous weeks. It'll cover game theory and its many applications, including some that I've listed there. Okay, and in that part, some of the examples and theories that we'll be going through are in chapters 28 to 30 of the book, but I have more there that's going outside the book as well. Okay, so how do you know what you're responsible for in this class? Okay, or the perennial question, what's on the exam? Okay, well, for one thing, I've actually already posted a number of sample exams, okay, which you might find useful to look at even the start of the term just to get a sense of, okay, I don't know how to answer those questions. It's nice that we're going to be learning how to do that. But also this sort of overriding answer is anything that's on the exam will be both in lecture and reinforced on homework problems. So that is the overriding guide to what you are truly responsible for, okay? And the textbook is a useful supplement, okay? But there definitely won't be questions on something that's in a textbook chapter that I didn't happen to talk about. So also I want to emphasize, if it's going to be on the exam, it'll have been in lecture and there'll have been something at least related in a homework problem, okay? So occasionally I'll go off on a tangent because there's something I find interesting, and then you'll never see anything about that on the homework. And I think you'll be able to tell what those tangents are probably, and be able to tell that they're not going to wind up on the exam. Okay. So yeah, you should be able to tell. Okay, I'm catching up with the chat. What will the homework usually look like? Well, you'll be seeing assignment 1 will be posted very soon. So you'll be seeing that shortly, okay? There will be problems. So yeah, the correct date for exam 2 was earlier in the syllabus right here, okay? Monday, October 18th. Yeah, homeworks are going to be about once a week, okay? and they'll always be posted at least a week before they're due. Yeah, and generally, as often as possible, they'll be due on Wednesdays. That's why I have office hours on Tuesdays. Okay. So yes. So anyway, I like seeing people, so I put my office hours on Tuesdays, the day before the homework is due. If you're a professor and you decide you don't want to see students, okay, put your office hours the day after the homework is due, 6 days before the next homework. But anyway, yes. So so feel free. Hopefully, when you stop by office hours on Tuesday, it'll be at a point where you've made an attempt at the homework and something's got you stuck. Feel free then to stop by with your questions. Okay. Good. Anything else? I have one more chat here. Those of us in mathematical econ, what should you know about its relation to this course? Okay, good question. There will be some multivariable calculus in this course. Okay, calculus that's usually taught in the math department. They probably call it calculus 3 or multivariable calculus. Here we call it mathematical econ. It's a half semester course that some of you are taking. So for the first month of the course, the part of that you'll need will be basically like partial derivatives and what they mean. Okay. And I will give quick reviews of that even as we go, but it will certainly be helpful to have already seen it in that course or to have taken that, any Calculus 3 course or equivalent in previous semesters. But I don't use a very big fraction of what's in Calculus 3. Okay, no div grad curl and all that. Okay. So what we will use a lot, okay, is algebra, regular calculus 1 and 2, single variable calculus, and then a little bit of multivariable calculus, partial derivatives, things like that. Okay, maximizing things with more than one variable. But I will give quick reviews of the techniques for that as we go as well. Okay, so it's really something corresponding to maybe the first few weeks of a traditional Calculus 3 course, or certainly things that you'll cover early on if you're concurrently taking that math course, the economics math course. Yeah, if you have the option and the price is about the same, someone is asking, should you get the calculus or the non-calculus textbook? Yeah, slight preference for the calculus textbook. Okay. But if there's a used of the other one and it's much cheaper, just go ahead. It's not going to matter a lot. I mean, the calculus that you need will be on my slides as well. Okay. Any more questions? Okay. So I'm going to click back to here. Okay. Oh, so first, before I click back to there, let me show you the Canvas site. Ooh, you're getting to see the instructor view. Okay. All the things that I've hidden from you, you can see on this view. Okay. So more to the point. So this cover illustration here is just one of my favorite slides from the class. When we get to notes 10 in about 6 weeks, you'll see what the significance is. For the moment, it's just I don't know. I just thought it was cute with the walrus and the apples and bananas. Okay. So you'll see why I have a walrus on the slide when we get there. Okay, so yeah, on the Canvas page, you have links to the syllabus. There's a Mob Lab student guide and there's a code you'll need for MobLab that I haven't given you yet. I'll send you the link soon. And I've put up all the lectures, okay, as I mentioned in my announcement. You know, every year I kind of make revisions as I go, but this is actually amazingly, my 9th year teaching this class. So over the years, I have made a number of major revisions, but this year I suspect just minor revisions. So I've posted all the notes in advance. So you can look ahead as far as you want. Okay, so there are all the notes. I put them into segments there, into natural segments according to how the course groups. So everything before the midterm is in those first 2 modules. And then the second half notes are there. And then if anyone wants to look at it way ahead of time, I've put up the old exams there way early. Usually I've done that closer to the exams. Now these are up way ahead of time if you want to look there, okay? And assignments, all of the assignments will be posted in the assignments section of Canvas, okay? This is not, these are, okay, this should be hidden now that I see this, okay. I think I've got, do I have a whole assignment module hidden? Okay, so those are, last year the exams were given over Canvas as well, that won't be true this year. So all the assignments will be here, okay. I will start, I'll have them hidden, meant to have them hidden for the moment, okay, and start unhiding them as they're assigned. Okay, yes, I didn't hide them. Okay, so yes, so don't get too far ahead, okay, because I might revise the assignments before I assign them. Yes, yeah, so the assignments I do revise every year. And so when they're ready, they'll be unhidden, and the due date and everything will be there. And all assignment submission will be on Canvas, okay? That is just the easier way to do things. So you can write it up in any electronic format that you want, or you can write it on paper and scan it. I'll be sending further guidelines for scanning. If you scan things, okay, be sure to scan it well, okay? So there are scanner apps for your phone that will auto frame things and put them in PDF format, okay? And it will put several pages into one file. That is much more convenient to grade, okay? What is not convenient to grade is just taking photos and submitting 3 separate JPEGs of your 3 pages, okay? So I have an app on my phone. I'm just reminding myself what it's called. It's called Scanner Pro, okay? I paid a few dollars for the professional version, and it's worth it. I get better scans, okay? It's it's a very minor expense, all considered. So there are many scanner apps available. And again, the advantage of scanner apps over just taking pictures is that they put things into a PDF format with all your pages in one file, okay? And that's what we want. It's much better to have, when you're submitting a document, you should submit a document with 3 pages in one file. It's much more professional and easier to deal with than submitting a bunch of JPEGs. So please do that. It's a skill that should transfer to real life outside of this class, okay? To sending people nicely formatted scans when you have to send them scans instead of ugly JPEGs. Okay. Are there any TAs? Yes. Okay. And I will add their names soon. Okay, so there will be TAs. They will both run the recitation sections on Fridays and have office hours, and their office hours will be announced soon. Okay. Yeah, so someone asked, how much calculus review will I be doing? It should be enough that if you basically, my hope is that if you learned it well at the time you took it, but it's been a year or two and you've half forgotten, that that what I do will be enough to remind you. Okay. So yeah. So I mean, as I use things, there will be a little bit of review. Okay. But the class is, let's see, for people who are facile with I would say the simpler elements of calculus and algebra, taking derivatives of basic functions, doing basic algebraic manipulations, maximizing functions. That's going to make the class a lot easier. I mean, if you've half forgotten but you remember quickly, then you'll be fine. And some of the people who have more trouble in the course, it can be because some people have almost completely forgotten or never really happened to learn it that well. That's going to make the class a good deal harder. Okay, if you're in that category. But if you maybe it was a couple of years ago in high school when you took calculus and you knew it well at the time, you should be fine. Okay, there should be enough review that you'll pick it back up. Okay, right, and I'll remind you. I'll even remind you some basic things, right? Like I remember giving an exam once where, in order to do a certain problem, you had to take the derivative of the log. And just in case anyone, in a couple of years had forgotten what the derivative of the log function was, I didn't want them to get totally stuck on that problem. So I added a little note that says, well, this is what the derivative of the log function is. Okay, so I do little things like that just because if you basically remember calculus but forgot some of the details, right, I'm going to try really hard to make it so you're fine. Okay, and definitely so you don't get punished on an exam for forgetting some little piece of calculus trivia, like, oh yeah, what was the derivative of that function? Okay, but more basic things like what's the derivative of x squared, x cubed, I'll expect you to just know that. All right. So now I think I'll go back to my slides. Okay, so modeling the apartment market. Okay, so we're going to be modeling the apartment market in a certain neighborhood. Okay, and what are the basic questions we might ask about the outcomes in this market? Okay, who's going to wind up renting and occupying these apartments? At what price? Will the allocation of apartments be desirable? And what does it even mean for the allocation to be desirable? Okay, so basic assumption that you remember from your previous course is that markets reach an equilibrium. That means that the market price adjusts until supply equals demand. Okay, so looking forward here. Suppose that the most any one person is willing to pay to rent a close apartment is $500 a month. Then the price of, then at that price of $500, the demand would be 1. Okay, and this is getting into what's the definition of a demand curve. Okay, and if the price has to drop to 490 before a second person would rent, we would say that at price 490 we have a demand of 2. Okay, QD is for quantity demanded. Okay, so then the lower the rental rate is, the larger is the quantity of close apartments demanded. And we graph this as a downward sloping demand curve. And there it is. That's what a demand curve might look like. Okay, it represents the fact that at price 500, one person wants to occupy the apartment. Okay, now One thing everyone notices when they start seeing these supply and demand curves is that they look a little bit backwards from what you've come to expect from how we graph things in mathematics, okay? Because it's natural to think of demand as being a function of price, okay? At a certain price, the quantity is determined by how many people want to buy it at that price. But then, this graph looks like the vertical and horizontal are flip-flop, right? And economists always do things this way. They always put quantity demanded on the horizontal and price on the vertical instead of the reverse. And there's a very long tradition of this. Okay, it goes back to the 1700s. Someone named Cournot, you'll hear about a few times. Okay, and it turns out there are good reasons for this. Okay, it's not just economists being weird or not knowing the way the rest of the world does math. There are actually good reasons this way, and I'll get to it. Okay. One possible model of apartment supply is that it takes time to build more apartments. So if we're thinking about the short run, the quantity available is fixed or inelastic. Maybe it's fixed at 100. Okay. In that case, the supply curve is going to look like this. It's going to be vertical. Okay. So at sort of regardless of what the price is, there's going to be a supply of 100 apartments. Okay, this is if we're thinking about the short run. And there might be a different supply curve if we were talking about the longer run, where if the price is high, people will want to build more apartments. But this is the short run. Okay. And how does market equilibrium work? Okay. Well, the idea, of course, is that if the rental price is too low, then people will demand more than the supply. And what will happen, it will be natural for the price to rise, okay? Because the landlords are going to be aware of what's going on in the market. They're going to say, my gosh, I had 5 applicants for this one apartment at the listed rent. I think I could fill the apartment even at a higher rent, okay? Or it's as if they're trying to get the applicants to bid against each other, maybe, okay? So if the price is too low, so the demand exceeds supply, then the people on the supply side are going to say, oh, I can charge a higher price, okay? On the other hand, if the price is too high, then not all the apartments will fill up, and the people with empty apartments, okay, the landlords with empty apartments will say, gee, I don't like it being empty. I better lower it. Okay. Excuse me. 1 minute. Okay. Finally, we expect to reach a point where demand equals supply, and then the price, there'll be no reason for the price to either rise or fall, and that's called the competitive equilibrium, okay? And of course, that's where the supply curve meets the demand, okay? And the vertical coordinate of that intersection is the price, and the horizontal coordinate, I've called it PE for the equilibrium price. That's what E is for. The horizontal coordinate is the quantity, okay? And who is going to be in the apartments? It'll be the people who are willing to pay that price. And in this diagram, there will be exactly 100 people who are willing to pay that price or more, okay? The ones who are willing to pay a lot more will be very happy. The the ones who are only willing to pay around exactly that price will be sort of, medium happy. It's like, okay, I got this apartment. It's better than nothing, but I'm not thrilled. Okay. But those will be the people who are in the apartments, the ones who are most willing to pay. That's how a standard competitive market works. The goods go to the people who are the most willing to pay for them, okay, who are willing to pay the highest value, okay? People who are not willing to pay that amount will try a different way, okay? We assume that they will live somewhere else, some other neighborhood. So who rents the close apartments? Those most willing to pay. The allocation is by willingness to pay. And we can ask whether this is the best way to allocate apartments. Okay, but before I go on, I want to talk about a very important concept here in this diagram. And this is going to explain why the diagram is drawn this way and not with the horizontal and vertical reverse. Or it'll start to explain that. Okay, there will be actually a bunch of moments in the next few weeks where you'll see that it's kind of convenient for it to be this way that Carnot chose in the 1700s, that we still do it, and not with the horizontal and vertical reverse. So here's one thing. When we look at this horizontal axis, okay, let me take my drawing tool. I can think of all of the people who are thinking about renting an apartment being lined up along that axis. And I put the people who are willing to pay the most on the left of the diagram and the people who are willing to pay the least on the right-hand side of the diagram. Okay. And it's these people, the people whose willingness to pay is highest, okay, who wind up getting the apartments. So if I think about, say, over here, if I have 50, quantity 50 along the horizontal axis, what's the height of the curve at that 50 point on the horizontal axis? What that tells me is when I line up the people from the most willing to pay on down to the least willingness to pay, the 50th ranked person was willing to pay this much, okay? The first person way over here on the left side of the diagram, there's a first person who's willing to pay a lot more than that, who's willing to pay this height, okay? The 50th person is willing to pay considerably less, this height, on down, as we continue down through the rankings, on down to the 100th most willing person. Well, the 100th most willing person was willing to pay this much. And when there are 100 apartments, that 100th ranked person is the pivotal person, okay? Basically, the landlords want to fill 100 apartments, assuming that the prices are set competitively, they have to cater to that 100th customer, that person who's 100th most willing to pay. And that person is the person who's exactly willing to pay the equilibrium price, okay? So I'll probably go over this again because it's an important concept. But so there are two ways to think about this demand function, okay? One of them is that it's just a demand function. It tells you for any quantity how many people demand. But if you think of it that way, then the diagram seems to be sort of reversed, like, because I'm going from the vertical, from the price on vertical to how many people are willing to pay that price on the horizontal, which is backwards from how we usually do functions. You can also think of it as the inverse process of going from the horizontal to the vertical, okay? And when you think about that inverse function, it's telling you how much is that 50th person willing to pay, okay? So it's, when you view it sort of sideways, it's a demand curve. When you view it going from the horizontal to the vertical, it's a willingness to pay curve, okay? It asks the question, the 50th ranked person, how much are they willing to pay? The 100th ranked person, how much are they willing to pay, okay? So the demand curve is also a willingness to pay curve. And it's when we think of it as a willingness to pay curve that the horizontal and vertical become natural, that you understand why economists have been doing it this way for 200 years. Okay. Okay, and I'll get to that. That's also, I think that's repeated in my next set of slides. Maybe I happen to get to it today as well. Okay, let me clear this. Okay, so I was just saying, competitive market, the people who get the apartments tend to be the most willing to pay. Is that a good way or the best way to allocate apartments? Well, it leads to some complaints. Okay, any way you do things leads to some complaints, and this way certainly does. So here's the illustration of one complaint about competitive apartment markets. So the apartments are allocated by willingness to pay. We could complain that how much you're willing to pay, it's not really the same necessarily as who wants it more, or it's not really the same as who benefits more when we try to evaluate that subjectively. Okay, so here to illustrate that, I have two famous fictional characters. Okay, this is Richie Rich. There was a TV cartoon of Richie Rich when I was a kid. Also some, I think he came from the comic books before that. Who's this? You might be able to figure out what fictional character that is. That is Tiny Tim from A Christmas Carol. Okay, and here's the story about them and the apartments. Okay, so they're both going to be going to the same college. Richie Rich has a robot chauffeur. Okay, so Richie Rich had a robot chauffeur way back into the 80s. We've almost caught up with Richie Rich. Okay, we'll all have self-driving cars soon. But yeah, he has a self-driving car with a robot. He doesn't really need the close apartment, but he'd still like it. And he has, as you can see, piles of money to throw around. So he's willing to pay $1,000. Tiny Tim is on crutches. As you can see, it's going to be really hard for him to even get to class if he doesn't live very close. But he needs so many other things that he really, when he's strapped for cash, he could really only pay $300 to get to class. Okay. Okay. So what should we do about that? I mean, so, a lot of governments or colleges, if these apartments happen to be, university owned, would want to do something about this situation. So the government or whatever benevolent institution controls the housing might simply assign the apartment to Tim and say, it's going to be rent controlled. You're only going to have to pay as much as you can afford. Okay. All right. So in some ways, clearly that's a good thing. Okay, because we want Tiny Tim to be able to get to class. And after all, if Richie Rich doesn't get the apartment, he can just hop in his robot chauffeur car. Now, there's a classic economics objection to this sort of interference in markets, to rent controls or other price controls. And here, I'm going to discuss the objection and then some objections to the objection. So keep in mind, as I discuss one side, I'm probably getting to the other side, okay? In fact, there's a classic joke, right? Economists do a lot of on the one hand. On the other hand, President Truman once famously got sick of that and said, could someone please send me a one-handed economist? Okay. Okay, but here's on the other hand. Call this the right hand, just to make an arbitrary choice there. So this is an important concept, Pareto efficiency, okay, which we will use throughout the class, okay? And this is a concept which is probably new in this course, or at least in the level of detail that we'll discuss it. Certainly, I would expect to be new to you in this course. So, two definitions, very important definitions, which we will use repeatedly. They will be repeated on future sets of slides just to drum them in. A Pareto improvement makes everyone better off, or some better and some equal. So to extend that a bit, a Pareto improvement is a way of changing society in some way that helps some people and doesn't hurt anyone. Okay, so a Pareto improvement is a good thing. It's a change to society which would get a unanimous yes vote. Okay, or maybe lots of people don't care. I mean, a Pareto improvement could be as simple as a private exchange between two people and the rest of the world doesn't care. Okay, but it's a change for which we have some yes votes from all the people involved, in fact, and maybe a bunch of people who don't. No one is voting no on a Pareto. Okay. A Pareto efficient outcome is one that cannot be Pareto improved. Okay. So these are two, closely related but separate concepts talking about different things. Pareto improvement compares one economic situation to another. Okay, a Pareto improvement is a property of a change in the economy, okay, or the delta, as some people call it. We use math terminology. A Pareto efficient outcome is a property of how the economy is now, okay? So we might ask, is the economy now Pareto efficient, or is it not? In which case there is a Pareto improvement to an economy that's unanimously better, okay? So loosely, if there's a Pareto efficient outcome, there's no wasted welfare. Another way of saying it is that if the market is Pareto efficient, we can only improve one person's welfare by lowering another person's welfare, okay? So if there exists any deal that two people or more than two people could make that makes them all better off, then we are not Pareto efficient, okay? Because such a deal would be a Pareto improvement, okay? I'm reiterating a little here just because I want you to get used to this language, okay? Okay. So more on this. So slight repeat here. Allocation is Pareto efficient. If there's no further reallocation, then improves everyone's welfare. Now let's think about this rent control, okay? If rent controls are in place, then Richie Rich would like to pay Tiny Tim $700 to sublet the apartment, and Tiny Tim would presumably like to take it, okay? Because we know Richie Rich was actually willing to pay $1,000, so he's thrilled to pay only $700. Would Tiny Tim like to take the $700 and let Richie Rich have the apartment? I mean, yes, because he's so much in need of so many things that even though the apartment's nice, it was only worth $300 to him. He would take the $700, okay? So if there's a transaction that makes everyone better off and you're blocking that transaction, that is Pareto inefficient, okay? So this is why one of Pareto's major contributions to economic thought was if people are making a free exchange of goods and services, it's probably making them both better off, and we probably shouldn't block that, okay? There are tons of caveats to that I'll get to, okay? But that's the basic thought, okay? That's the first thought that we have about Pareto efficiency. So the standard economist recommendation is to deal with unfair outcomes by transferring money, then letting Tiny Tim decide how best to spend it, okay? So this would say, instead of rent controlling the apartments, let's give Tiny Tim a better financial aid package so that he can afford the apartment, okay? Maybe our financial aid package needs to include something extra for students with disabilities, right? An allowance for more expensive housing for students with disabilities who really need to be close. Okay, and then we just step back and let Tiny Tim spend that money however he thinks best. Okay, and then Pareto doesn't object anymore. Okay, Pareto doesn't object to helping out people who are in need. He just says, do it in such a way it doesn't block transactions. Okay, now that idea doesn't always work perfectly in real life, and I'll have to get to it more in future classes. And since it's 2:20, I will have to stop there and finish these slides next time. But I'll leave the channel on if anyone wants to stay and answer questions. Okay, but that's it. So to most of you, farewell, and I will see you Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Back to the Richie Rich case. If it were to be Pareto improvement, how would the case change?
Yeah, so if there were a Pareto improvement, well, let's see. It's in this case. So ask me again, if it were not, if what were not, so if we allowed the Pareto improvement of Richie Rich subletting the apartment, I mean, so we would presume that if he sublet the apartment, it would be because Tiny Tim just needs the money so much that he would rather suffer. Like, we assume that people can decide what's best for them, right? So if he would rather have it be really hard to get to class, but have that extra money for medical bills or whatever else he needs it for, we would assume that, okay, that transaction was better for you. Okay, that was better for you, right? So, right, we assume that giving people more options is going to make them better off, right? And so, yeah, so the kind of the blanket recommendation means, it's fine to be, it makes perfect sense to be worried about things being unfair and about whether disabled students and poor students can afford to be on campus, but why not just help them out with a better financial aid package and then let them figure out, right?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, I have 5 things in the chat, but okay, they're just thank yous. Okay, and Rachel, if you have a question, it's fine. Okay, otherwise I'm going to sign off. Okay, signing off.